I actually feel really at home here, partly because you guys are fabulous. I mean, really, honest, I don't say that to everybody. I'm just saying, okay? And I actually cut my eye teeth as a new Christian in a beach church. 50 years ago, Hope Chapel, Hermosa Beach. I don't know, some of you might be familiar with that church. And it was a Jesus person church, and still is, kind of, except for back then we all had long hair, Those were the days, right? It's a whole different. Some of you guys still manage. Good for you. All right. There's an old Jesus freak right there. But that was then. This is now. Times have changed, haven't they? It's a very different world. Actually, some of the younger people in the audience, and I'm glad you're here, you have no idea the difference because you're immersed in a culture that is, by comparison to 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, is excessively hostile to the things that you think are most important in life. Jesus and following God and honoring Him with your life and living for Him and living according to the standards that God has established for our human flourishing. And back then in the 60s, in the early 70s, we sold, as the prophet said, we sowed to the wind, and now we're reaping the whirlwind. And it's very, very difficult. I mean, I'm kind of an old guy right now, so I'm on my way out. We're going to be hanging up my cleats, before too long, and we're passing the baton to a new generation. But I'm glad that I don't have to do and face what you guys have to face. What I hope to do, though, is to equip you. Because I've been facing the changes for 50 years as a follower of Christ. Stand to reason, 30 years this year. Okay, so we've been out there doing the work, and thank you. That's really sweet. And listen, it's not me. I've had a tiger by the tail for the last 30 years. I didn't make it happen. I was just there when it all happened, and God has been doing some amazing things through us, and we're going to continue doing that by God's grace because the message is always more important than the messenger. And this messenger is going to be moving on, but the message is going to be same for our team and ought to be the same for you. But I want to try to pass the baton to you regarding a particular issue that's really, really important. Paul says in Colossians chapter 2, verse 9, he says, "Do not be taken captive by philosophy and empty deception according to the traditions of men." He didn't have a beef with philosophy. I got a master's degree in philosophy. It's really helped me as a Christian. It was the philosophies of men, the ordinary principles of the world that were the problem, not the world according to Christ. And so there's basically two ways of looking at reality, Jesus' way and every other way. And Jesus got it right. Okay, he understood the real world. He knew how he made us. He knew the best way for us to live, and he gives us guidance in his word for that kind of thing. But those philosophies out in the world, and there are many, many more that are tempting and alluring for a lot of reasons now than there were 50 years ago when I first became a follower of Christ at UCLA. No, and they are very, very compelling. And this is why Paul says don't be taken captive by it. Because they look attractive, they sound attractive, all the rhetoric that goes along with it, and now more than ever, all the pressure to give in. For the first time in the history of this country, it is costing Christians something to be faithful to Christ. Christians from the beginning and all over the world have paid a price. We haven't had to until now. And now people are losing situations, they're losing their jobs, they're being fined, there are all kinds of things if they stand faithful to Christ. It is a difficult culture to maneuver in. Part of our goal at Stand to Reason is to help you to do that faithfully. It's not going to be easy. It's not always even going to be effective because you can't always change other people's minds. You can't get them to see the truth. But I'll tell you one thing you can do, you can always be faithful. And a big part of what I want to do is to protect the body of Christ from the world without and from the wolves within. And there are more wolves than there ever have been. But even so, it's still possible for us to be faithful. So I'm going to talk about a topic right now, this morning, and I want to introduce the topic with an anecdote, something that happened to me a number of years ago when I was at a chiropractor's office, which they should call chiropractors, right? Because that's what goes on there. And I was getting prepped, And if you know anything about stand to reason, you know we use questions a lot in engaging people because questions keep you safe, all right? Questions keep you safe. Wrote a whole book called Tactics on how to use questions to maneuver safely in conversations. So I'm asking this gal a question. I'm just opening the conversation. Can I ask you a question? I'm just curious about some things. Sure, go ahead. I want to ask you a question about morality. She says, what do you mean by morality? Thought this is not a good sign. Okay, so, ethics, what's right and wrong, etc. She's having a hard time following, so I thought I'd give her a clear case example. How about this? Is murder wrong? Well, what? Well, I'm thinking. And I'm thinking, what's to think about? This is so maybe that wasn't an easy enough one, so I tried another. And by the way, this just gives you a sense of where our culture is at in the way they think about morality. And so I said, okay, how about this? Is it okay to torture babies for fun? And here's what she said. She said, I wouldn't want anyone to do that to my baby. Now, I want you to think about that response. Because, of course, who would want anybody to do that to their baby? But I didn't ask the question about what she liked. I asked her a question about something, whether it was right or wrong in itself. And she gave me a response from her personal preference. And I said, that's not really the question I'm asking. I want to know whether it could possibly be defensible in any culture, at any time, under any circumstance, to torture a child just for the pleasure it brought to you. Long pause. Finally, she said, I think people should be allowed to decide for themselves. Now, this actually happened in two conversations, and one of them, the second one, was when I was being interviewed on KFI, more stimulating talk radio. You know that show. And Barbara Whiteside, and we got into this conversation, and she affirmed the legitimacy, in a certain sense, of torturing babies for fun because she did not want to be caught in public acting like her moral viewpoint had anything to do with anybody else's actions. She didn't want to push her morality on other people. And so she's defending her relativistic moral turf. Okay, so the question is, what's going on here? And the answer is, it's the power of an idea, and the idea which has penetrated our culture is called relativism. Now, relativism shows up in a lot of different ways in our culture. It is the leading ethic in our culture right now, more than ever before. It is the rise and triumph of the sovereign self, as one person put it in the title of his book. The theme or the slogan that guides the thinking of our culture right now is simply, you do you. This is a painfully narcissistic culture driven by their feelings. And by the way, that whole mentality has made its way into the church as well. And the reason is, and it's understandable, because we are immersed in a culture, and it's hard for us to assess our own points of view apart from the pressure of the culture that makes all these other things sound so good. Because being authentic, that sounds like a good thing. And authenticity now doesn't mean being true to objective moral values against the tide. It means being true to yourself and whatever you believe at the moment. And that's the kind of thing we're up against. And by the way, just to give you an idea of the cultural contradiction that's embedded here, maybe a couple of years ago, some of you saw Oprah Winfrey on the Oscars. Remember that night? And I don't watch those things, but I did see this clip. And she got up there and she said to you, oh gosh, how did she put it? She said, live your truth. Live your truth. How many saw that? Nobody. Great. This is a good sign. That same thing happened to the other services. Nobody knew this. She's out there. Live your truth. It's Oprah Winfrey, right? And the audience is going crazy. Oh, it's so wonderful. And people are weeping and standing ovation. Okay? And 3 years before, Harvey Weinstein was living his truth. Remember him? #MeToo. All the sexual abuse that he used his power to accomplish on many of the women that were in that audience. They didn't like that. This is the nature of the contradiction that the world is living in. Okay? And there's a way to capitalize on that contradiction. I want to talk about that a little bit to help people see what's actually going on. The foolishness in the lives that they've chosen to live apart from Christ, apart from God's view of reality, falling prey to the deceptive traditions of men, philosophies of men. So I want to talk about relativism today to equip you to understand it, to protect yourself against it, and also to be able to talk with other people in a gracious, thoughtful, effective, and incisive way, using some tactical maneuvers to help them with one particular kind of relativism, and that's called moral relativism. And that was captured in the illustration I started out with the at the chiropractor's office, all right? How could somebody say this kind of thing about something that ought to be as obvious as torturing babies for fun is wrong, okay? Because of their confusion about the nature of morality. So let me define my terms first, okay? What is moral relativism? And I want you to think about the distinction right now, for simplicity's sake, between ice cream and insulin, okay? Ice cream and insulin. When you choose an ice cream, you choose what you like. You know, some people like one flavor, other people like another flavor, and no big deal. We have differences of opinion, and everybody has, in a certain sense, a right to their own flavors. So if you like one flavor, somebody else doesn't like that flavor, we don't think they're wrong. We don't think they're immoral. We don't think they're sinners. We don't think they're going to hell because they don't like our flavor, right? I mean, that's silly. And so when you might say that when it comes to ice cream flavors, whatever flavor you like is true for you. Okay? Now, moral relativism is when people view moral obligations or moral claims about what is right and what is wrong like ice cream claims. That's why you hear people say, well, abortion may be wrong for you, but it's not wrong for me. Certain sexual behaviors may be wrong for you guys. Good, don't do them. But it doesn't mean it's wrong for other people to do them, all right? And if you act as if your, in a certain sense, moral flavor applies to other people, well, that's just bad manners. That may be considered intolerant or bigoted. Or the favorite word now is a phobe. So whatever it is that you believe that somebody else doesn't agree with, they just call you a phobe in that regard, all right? But because in their mind, acting as if morality yours applies to other people, you've crossed the line. You're no longer neutral towards other people and tolerant towards other people. Now you're invading their space. Now, by the way, what I'm saying is every person in this room is completely familiar with. And by the way, some of you might even agree with it, you know? Okay, well, hopefully you'll think differently when I'm done, but that's the standard. That's moral relativism. And one of the virtues of moral relativism, apparently, is the tolerance that it seems, or it's supposed to breed among people. You have your view, I have mine, we differ, we're tolerant of each other. Okay, that's how that way that works. Now, I'm contrasting that to another view, where in moral relativism, there are no 10 commandments over everybody. There are no commandments over everybody. It's a matter of individual thing. It's ice cream kind of thing. Moral objectivism is kind of like insulin. When you search for a medicine, it doesn't matter what you like. It doesn't matter what your personal preference is. Flavors don't matter. What matters is not something on the inside in terms of your beliefs. It's something on the outside of you that either can or can't do what you need to have done for you. Okay? So in other words, things like insulin are objective truths about the objective world, the world out there. Okay? And if you're an objectivist with regards to morality and not a subjectivist or relativist, then it's your view that morality isn't a matter of personal opinion. We don't make up our own morality. We discover the morality that is over everyone, that is universal. Some people call it an absolute. We discover that, and then we are beholden to that whether we like it or not. So in objectivism, when it applied to morality. Morality isn't just something like we think up ourselves, okay? It's a feature of the world, all right? Like gravity. If you don't believe in gravity, you're not going to float away, okay? Because gravity is part of reality. And according to moral objectivism, morality is part of reality. It isn't up to us. Okay, now all I've done is made a distinction between these two views so we know what we're talking about. I haven't assessed them at all right? Were you with me so far on this? Okay, so what I want to do with the rest of our time together here is I want first to talk about what I call the myth of neutrality. Because in moral relativism, the idea is that we're neutral with regards to other people. We don't judge other people. We let them do what they want to do, and we get to do what we want to do. No judgments allowed. We are neutral. That's a myth. It's a myth in our culture. It'll be obvious in a few moments when I demonstrate that. All right? But if tolerance is based on neutrality, then the kind of tolerance that is tied to that kind of neutrality, that's also a myth. The concept of tolerance has changed, and it's gone topsy-turvy in the last 50 years, okay? It actually, and this is another topic I don't have time to pursue right now, it actually means the exact opposite of what it used to mean. But it still sounds like a virtue, and you're going to see in a moment how it isn't a virtue the way it's being practiced. And because what I'm going to show you, after I show you that tolerance is kind of a myth, I want to show you how to answer the charge of intolerance when it's raised against you. People call you intolerant or maybe arrogant or narrow-minded or something like that. I'm going to show you, using a tactical approach, how to respond to that in a gracious way. Relax, no fighting. You just want to help people to see something. And then what I want to do is I want to actually give you an argument against moral relativism. I think it's false that morality is a matter of individual opinion. I think there are moral rules that are over everybody, and I also am convinced that everybody knows that. And so I'm going to explain to you how you can leverage that in a conversation. Okay, so let's talk about the myth of moral neutrality. I want to read something to you here, written by Faye Waddleton. Now, she's the former president of Planned Parenthood. And you can imagine that I don't agree with a lot of things that she says, but I'm not reading this to ridicule her. She has written a very perceptive and elegantly written piece on morality. A few paragraphs here I'll read to you. And it's very good writing. In fact, when I read this, you're going to think to yourself, wow, I don't think I'm supposed to agree with her, but I don't know how I can disagree without sounding foolish. It's that good. And that's the way a lot of relativism is characterized in our culture. But there's a flaw here, and some of you may catch it, but I will explain it to you when I'm done, and hopefully that will give you insight into the broader flaw of relativism in our culture. Here's what she says. Like most parents, I think that a sense of moral responsibility is one of the greatest gifts I can give my child. But teaching morality does not mean imposing my moral values on others. It means sharing wisdom and giving reasons for believing as I do, and then trusting others to think and judge for themselves. My parents' morals were deeply rooted in religious conviction, but tempered by tolerance. So there's our word. The essence of which is respect for other people's views. They taught me that reasonable people may differ on moral issues and that fundamental respect for others is morality of the highest order. I have devoted my career to ensuring a world in which my daughter, Felicia, can inherit that legacy. I hope the tolerance and respect I show her as a parent is reinforced by the work she sees me doing every day, fighting for the right of all individuals to make their own moral decisions about childbearing. Of course, she's talking about abortion on demand there, all right? 75 years ago, Margaret Sanger founded Planned Parenthood to liberate individuals from the mighty engines of repression. As she wrote, the men and women of America are demanding that they be allowed to mold their lives not at the arbitrary command of church or state, but as their conscience and judgment may dictate. And then she closes. I'm proud to continue that struggle to defend the rights of all people to their own beliefs. When others try to inflict their views on me, my daughter, or anyone else, that's not morality. It's tyranny. It's unfair, and it's un-America. un-American. Close quote. Wow, that's good writing. That's powerful. That sounds so sensible. That sounds so reasonable. It sounds so tolerant. Okay, but there's a flaw there. And before we get to the flaw, let me ask you a question. From what you heard just a moment ago, from what she wrote to us, what is her understanding of the moral project? Is this more of an ice cream kind of thing? Is it more of an insulin kind of thing? What do you think? More of an ice cream kind of thing. Yeah, it was pretty clear. We should trust others to think and judge for themselves. Okay, it's up to them. Americans are demanding that they be allowed to mold their lives as their conscience and judgment may dictate. So she's relativistic. She promotes a moral neutrality and a non-interference. And by the way, if we're not neutral, like she's described, we don't let people decide for themselves, then we're not being what? Tolerant. Exactly. So you're right with me here. Okay, what's the problem? The problem is that Faye Waddleton is not neutral. How do I know that? Because of what she says. Does she have the same neutral, non-interfering respect for views that differ from hers? Well, let's see. She wants to continue the struggle to defend the rights of all people to their own beliefs, but with regards to those who disagree with her, they are unfair, un-American, and tyrannous. You realize those are all moral judgments that she's making. What happened to that neutrality? Where'd that go? Does Faye Waddleton have the same kind of neutral respect for a person who follows their conscience and tries to block the door of an abortion clinic so an unborn child can't be killed? No, she thinks that's wrong. In fact, she'll even go further. She'll force her moral viewpoint on you. How do I know that? She said so. Really? Where was that? I have devoted my career to ensuring a world in which my daughter Felicia can inherit that legacy. What legacy? Her point of view. And how does she ensure that? She's a lobbyist. She goes to Washington, D.C. to prevail upon congressmen and senators to pass laws that reflect her moral viewpoint so that you have to obey them even if you don't agree with her. Okay, now look at, I'm not objecting to that. I mean, this is the way the system works, okay? But I want you to see something. This came out when Congress passed a law making it a federal offense to block an abortion clinic. Now you've got these, these areas you can't even penetrate if you're a pro-lifer. You can only go so close. That's a federal law, all right? And when that law came out, Pamela Moraldo, who followed Faye Waddleton as president of Planned Parenthood, had this comment about the law. Now, I want you to listen to these words. I heard it when I was driving on the freeway when the newscast came on. Here's what she said about the law making a federal offense to block an abortion clinic. This law goes to show that no one can force their viewpoint on someone else. Friends, all laws force a viewpoint. That's the point. And by the way, they force moral viewpoints. And if they weren't moral viewpoints, if they were just power moves for someone's personal benefit, it's an illicit law. And I want you to think about this. I look at if Aristotle said that law is the foundation of culture. Okay, and if there's no morality guiding the law, then the only thing that is the foundation for culture is going to be power moves. That's all that's left. Neutrality is a myth. That's my point. If a person weighs in with a moral point of view, in virtually every single case, they are violating the neutrality, suggesting what ought to be the case, and therefore they're outside of their relativism, yet people do this all the time. Okay? Incidentally, the person who has no morality, no inside morality, no real sense that there is something wrong, we have a name for that kind of person. Sociopath. I'm not joking. Something's wrong with somebody if they don't have this machinery, and I'll get to this in just a moment. But I want to, since now we've seen that neutrality is a myth, somebody opens their mouth and weighs in. Then they've violated their neutrality. They're no longer neutral. And if they're not neutral according to the definition of tolerance, now they're no longer what? Tolerant on that definition. And so we're going to leverage that understanding, that insight, with someone who calls us intolerant, okay? So here's the tactical maneuver if somebody says that you're intolerant in a conversation, all right? You always ask for a definition. I have a book called Tactics. I don't know if I mentioned that yet this service, but in there we have a lot of maneuvers, and this is called sticks and stones. Okay, sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you. My mom said that. Well, she was wrong because names do hurt, obviously, sometimes. Nevertheless, it's the idea that when somebody calls you a name, you always ask for a definition. That's your tactical maneuver. You toss the ball back into their court with a question, because questions keep you safe. You offer a question and then let them respond. So the question you ask in this case is if somebody says you're intolerant, you ask them what that means. That's the tactic. What do you mean by that? Very simple question, or some variation. So what do you mean by intolerant? You say, I'm intolerant. What am I doing right now that qualifies me for that name, is what you're asking them. Okay. Now, I know what they're doing. I want them to say it, because that's going to give me a stepping stone to another part of the conversation. What they say is, well, you're intolerant because you think you're right, and you think other people are wrong. Okay, now let me ask you a question. Do you think when I weigh in on some issue, moral, spiritual, or whatever, do you think that I think I'm right? This is easy. Audience participation. Yes, of course I think I'm right. Of course. If I didn't think that my views were right, I wouldn't believe what I believe. I would believe something else and believe that we're right. Just like everyone else. Now that's the insight. Just like everyone else. The point is, I am not the only person in this conversation who thinks he's right. I'm just the only one who's being called a name for think he's right. Okay? And I want to push that back on the other person with another question. Okay? They say, you're intolerant. I say, what do you mean I'm intolerant? Well, you think you're right. Well, I do think I'm right. I could be mistaken. I'm open to talk about that, but I'm not just emoting. I'm not just socialized to believe this. I have reasons for my convictions, but I could be mistaken. But I want to know, another question, your views. Do you think your views are right? What's he going to say? No, I think all of my views are just dead wrong. That's not going to happen, right? Okay, now they might say, do like the postmodern two-step a little bit here. They might say, well, my views are right for me. Okay, well then why are you talking to me? I mean, it sounds to me like you're trying to correct me. You're telling me I'm mistaken about my view. I'm the intolerant one. You're the tolerant one, and you want me to be like you, right? So of course you think you're right. Okay, final question. Why is it when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant? And when you think you're right, you're just right? What am I missing here? Now, of course, I'm not missing anything. He's missing it. I just tossed that ball back in their court. Now I want to hear what that person has to say. Two times people have said to me, the reason that when you think you're right, you're intolerant, and when I think I'm right, is because I'm actually right. That's what they've said, okay? Now, what am I trying to do here? This is not a gotcha moment. This is not meant like to draw blood in conversation. We do these in conversations with people who disagree with us. If you're a follower of Christ, better not be a gladiator event. That's the way the world does it. We don't do that, okay? We are trying to get people to think about foolishness and get them to be straightened out a little bit. And I don't expect a person to change their mind immediately. I'm just trying to put a stone in their shoe. I'm just trying to annoy them in a good way, about something that happened. Think about this, because all they've done in response to my ideas, whatever it happens to be, about Jesus or some moral issue or whatever it is they've just changed the subject and called me a name. And this is the number one technique that the culture uses to silence opposition. They call you a name. They call you narrow-minded or intolerant or bigoted or some kind of phobe. That's all they do. They do not deal with the issue. Okay, now I've just written a new book. It'll come out 1 month from yesterday, I think, September 12th. And that's called Street Smarts. And in that book, I use the tactical approach to deal with individual issues like atheism, problem of evil, abortion, the Bible, Jesus, gender, sex, marriage, that kind of thing. So that's coming out in a month. If some of you have read the tactics book, this is the tactics, the third part of the game plan on steroids. I'm just saying. So I hope you keep your eyes open for that. But the whole idea is to help them to see what's going on. I was actually on a national TV show coming out of Toronto a number of years ago, and they put me in the hot seat, and there were a lot of other people. There were 4 other people that were kind of pounding up on me, national TV for an hour, because I didn't believe in religious pluralism, right? I believed that all religions can't be right. I wasn't even making the case for Christianity. I was just simply saying they can't all be true because they conflict with each other, right? But before long, all these names started coming in. You're narrow-minded, you're arrogant, you're this, that, and the other thing, you know. And I did point it out to them. I said, it's interesting how the conversation is going. We started out talking about this idea of religious pluralism, and now somehow we're talking about me, my personality. I'm narrow-minded, I'm intolerant, I'm arrogant, blah, blah, blah. By the way, if those were true about me, shame on me. But they were just saying that because they didn't like my ideas. I was being nice to them, okay? And they were not being nice to me. I mean, so it was so funny, the role reversal that was going on from the tolerant folk, you know what I'm saying, right? The tolerant street is a one-way street in our culture. Anyway, I just made that observation. So you think that I'm mean. Okay. Why don't I just agree that I'm mean? All those things you said about me, I'll just agree that I'm that way. Now we all agree that I'm awful. Can we get back to this other conversation? You know, it was just amazing. And see, the same thing when somebody raises that issue in a conversation with you. If somebody says says I'm intolerant, what if I just said, well, you're ugly, you know? No, I wouldn't say that because, first of all, it would be bad manners, even if true. And secondly, it would be bad thinking because can ugly people be right sometime, once in a while, maybe? Don't you hope so? Yeah, right. Okay. Yes, doesn't matter. You could be ugly and right. You could be good looking and wrong. You could be mean and be right. You could be nice and be wrong. One has nothing to do with the other in terms of the issue at hand. Now, of course, sweetness of speech makes ideas more persuasive, and that's important for us in honoring Christ to be that way. But the point is, regarding the issue, all they've done is change the subject, okay? And I want them to see that. That's what I want them to see. Okay, so that's the tolerance trick. Now what I like to do is I like to talk about relativism proper, all right? And I want to give you an argument against moral relativism. So I think that the idea that morality is just a matter of individual opinion is false. And I think that transcendent moral claims and obligations exist is true. Now, this is hard for a lot of people because you can't put that in a test tube, right? You can't, how could anybody know about that? And so this broad agnosticism when it comes to morality. We just can do what we think is right or maybe listen to an authority like a Bible, but who actually knows? And I'm convinced you can know this. All right? And so I'm going to show you why, but I'm going to argue in a very particular way. I'm going to argue based on what philosophers call an intuition. Now, when I say intuition, I mean something very particular. I don't mean like women's intuition. I believe in that, ladies. I'm just saying that's not what I'm talking about, all right? I'm not talking about something you learn. If you're in a particular profession, you do the same thing for a long time, you kind of get a second sense how things work, and some people call it an intuition. I'm not talking about anything you learned at all. In fact, an intuition is unlearned. It's part of the equipment, the kind of intuition I'm talking about, okay? And without these kinds of intuitions, you wouldn't be able to learn anything at all. So let me give you an illustration. Let's say I said to you, all men are mortal, okay? Socrates is a man, therefore what? Socrates is mortal. You all got that right. How did you get that right? I learned it in philosophy class. No, you didn't learn it in philosophy class. You don't have to take a philosophy to see that. because you can see that. If the first statement is true and the second statement is true, then the third statement follows from it. Notice the language I used. You can see it. Now, obviously, you don't see it with your eyes. You see it with a different faculty. You see it with a mental faculty that allows you to assess these things and notice and see that one follows from the other. So there's something you know for which you have no scientific physical evidence for. These are all ideas, but you're directly in contact with them. You can assess them based on your rational intuitions. And by the way, if I were talking to you and I went through that and you said, Anna, you have to prove that to me, that therefore Socrates is mortal, I would say, wait, that is the proof. You don't get that? If you were talking to somebody who didn't get that conclusion, what would you do? You'd start over. Okay, let me take it more slowly. Men are mortal. Yeah, got it. Socrates is a man. Got that too. Therefore, I have the faintest idea. Well, you would think he's not playing with a full deck, right? Something's not there that's supposed to be there. Okay, so that's the way intuitions work. With those, everybody can see. And if you don't see, something's wrong. So, for example, the burden of proof then is not on me on this. If I said, like, rape is wrong, and you said, I don't think so, well, I'm not going to say you have an interesting alternate morality. I'm going to say, get help. If you can't see obvious examples of moral truth. And that's what I'm going to trade on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use moral intuitions. We have rational intuitions. I think we have aesthetic intuitions. I don't think all beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I also think clearly we have moral intuitions. How do we know that we have moral intuitions? Because we talk about them all the time. It is hard to make any comment about anything controversial without having all these moral terms come out of our mouth. Now remember, words refer. They are meant to pick something out. So if I said there's a stool, see, I even pointed a little bit, but I'm not going to do that. Because my words are going to do the pointing. There's a stool to the right of me. It's a really cool stool. Never had a stool so nice. Looks like a Harley seat there. My words are pointing to the thing, right? So words refer to things. And a lot of the things our words refer to are not physical things. See how they love one another. I don't see any love. They're kissing. I don't see any love. You don't see the love. What you see is the evidence of it and maybe physical behavior, but you don't see the love. You infer the love from the behavior. And there are tons and tons of things like this. Our language points at things we believe are actually there, but they're not physical, okay? Now, we do this with morality all the time, and I'm going to trade in a couple things. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 what I call fatal flaws of relativism, and this is what I'm going to use. I'm going to look at the language we use that we think is meaningful, that points at something objectively moral. And if it doesn't do that, because relativism is true, then our words are meaningless because they don't point to anything, okay? You with me on methodology? Okay, if you got that, that's the hard part. The examples are pretty easy, all right? Here is the first one, and this is the best one. All the others follow from it, and they're similar, but this one is the absolute best one. In other words, an evidence that we're all aware of that makes moral relativism false and moral objectivism true. So here's the question. What is the most enduring, most consistent objection that people raise against the existence of God? The problem of evil. I think I'd heard it over here. Exactly. Many of you were thinking the same thing. How can there be a God who is good and powerful when there's so much evil in the world? Okay, you're familiar with that, right? Maybe you've asked yourself the same question. Okay, I want you to pay attention to the wording. How can there be a God, blah, 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 when there's so much evil? Where? In the world. In the world. If you're a relativist and you're consistent about your relativism, you think what relativism results in, or what it means, is there evil in the world? There can't be evil in the world unless there is a standard over everybody that is broken that indicates the evil that is happening. If you're a relativist, all you could say is, I don't like Hitler. I don't like Pol Pot. I don't like Joe Biden or Donald Trump or whatever. Pick your poison wherever you're at, The fact is, people make statements about those things because they think the things that are happening or the people they're describing are wicked. Wait, I thought you were a relativist. Oh, yeah. Don't push your morality on me. Wait, I'm confused. If you're a relativist, there are no moral standards, right? And that's why I can't push my morality on you, right? Yeah. Then how can you say there's evil in the world, which requires a moral standard that is over everybody that's broken? Now, maybe I went a little fast for some of you, and it's a little bit of a hard concept to get. So let me put it like give you a simple illustration. How many people have heard of the Autobahn in Germany? Oh, anybody here drive on the Autobahn? Oh, a few of you. I have. Can you break the speed limit on the Autobahn? No? Why not? There's no speed limit. You can't break a speed limit that doesn't exist. Now, I've driven on the Autobahn, and I went really, really fast for a few seconds in a rental car. Maybe it was a Porsche, which it wasn't. I might have gone a little bit longer, but that thing was rattling and shaking, whatever. Look, you can't break a speed limit that doesn't exist. Here's what relativism says. Relativism says there are no speed limits in the universe. If you're an atheist, there's no God to set the speed limits. There are no speed limits, so you can't violate any speed limits. All you can do is do things that people don't like, other people don't like. But you can't act as if you're obligated not to do things that people don't like, because the idea that you shouldn't do things that people don't like is a transcendent moral rule that you say doesn't exist. See the problem there? Is that the way people talk? No. They're always talking about things that they think are wrong, that are happening to them or happening in the world, even when they try to convince you that they're relativists. All right? Here's another way of putting it. And by the way I'm going to do it now will give you a bonus. All right? I'm just right now trying to demonstrate that relativism is false, and people know it because they all know, now it doesn't matter where you lived or when you lived, that there's something wrong with the world. The world is broken morally, okay? And that's evidence that relativism is false. It's not just evidence. It's a refutation of relativism, okay? So let me put it this way. The problem of evil, some people characterize things are not the way they're supposed to be. Simple. Okay? Well, wait a minute. You can't have a way things are not supposed to be unless there is a way that things that are supposed to be, right? So you can't break a law that doesn't exist. So that's the end of relativism. But I'm going to take another step further. You can't have a way that the world is supposed to be without a sposer. Got it? You can't have a speed limit of the universe without a governing authority that makes the speed limit to begin with. So it turns out that the problem of evil is not a good argument against God. It is a good argument against atheism. Now, I developed that very thoroughly in the new book coming out in September. But Street Smarts, again, the title. But that's just your little bonus for this session. The point I'm trying to make is the problem of evil disqualifies moral relativism. You got to do one or two things. You got to give up your relativism, which a lot of people aren't willing to do because it justifies their own behavior, or you got to give up your complaint about the problem of evil, which they don't want to do either because it's a favorite argument against God. What you can't do is have them both because they're inconsistent. Okay, so that's the first evidence. I'm going to give you two others very quickly because I am out of time. But I understand, somebody told me last service that the pastor's out of time all the time, and he just keeps going. And plus, my flight doesn't leave till tomorrow. No, actually, I live in Southern California, so we got all day. Anyway, so if relativism is true, you can never accuse anyone of doing something wrong. Now, what sense would that make, by the way? That's like saying you broke a rule in a game that has no rules. Okay? This game of life has no moral rules. So then how can you say somebody has broken the rules? But doesn't it seem like some things that people do are just generally bad? And if it's justified to think that some things are bad, maybe not all the things that Christians think are bad, but at least some things are bad, well, then moral relativism is false. Now, I just went through that one quickly because it's very similar to the first one. You get the first one, you're going to follow the rest. There's 7 of these. How about this? In moral relativism, if it's true, there is no tolerance. Why? Because tolerance is an obligation, apparently, that applies to all people. It is a universal obligation that applies to all people. But if there are no universal obligations, there is no obligation to be tolerant. In fact, if relativism is true, it's a good reason not to be tolerant. Why should I tolerate people I don't like? Go away. Or take that. And you could do something mean or nasty to them because that can't be deemed wrong either in a relativistic world. So in other words, if relativism is true, there are no objective principles in the world, and therefore there is no good, there is no evil, there is no justice, there is no fairness, no obligation of those things. There are no human rights. And there's no tolerance. And belief in relativism produces this kind of world. So who could live this way? The fact is, nobody does. Everybody knows better. And that's your key, and I'll give you a couple tactical moves and then close here on how to deal with it in people's lives. Okay? When people assert moral relativism, you want to ask a question that gets them to question their point, and to show that their view in practice is self-refuting. It destroys itself. I call that the suicide tactic, okay? And here's how it might work. Somebody says to you, you shouldn't push your morality on me. And you ask them, why not? Now what? It's over. You can say, because it's wrong. Wait a minute. You don't believe in that kind of thing, right? That's the point. So you get maybe the conversation will go a little longer because it may take a few moments for the change to fall into the meter for people because they just don't get it. They've been doing this for so long they don't see it. In that same chiropractor's office, I had a physical therapist named Gil that was working on me one day, and we're having a conversation. And some moral issue came up. I think it was homosexuality. He asked my opinion about it, and I offered some thoughts. And then he said, you Christians are really nice people much of the time, but you start getting judgmental. Okay, now, he just made a mistake. Some of you might be aware of this, but he wasn't aware of it. So I wanted to bring it out just a little bit more. And I said, Gil, what's wrong with that? I'm kind of like, kitty, 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 kitty. I got that like kind of thing. And he says, well, it's wrong to judge. Okay, now I got it. It's right there on the table. And so I said, well, Gil, if you believe it's wrong to judge, then why are you judging me right now? Crickets, right? Like, steps back, he's rubbing his chin, he's trying to figure out what just happened. And honestly, what I just offered is not very insightful. But until you see it, you don't see it, right? And they don't see it. And so he's thinking, finally he says, I guess it's okay to judge. But you can't push your morality on other people. That's what he said. You can't push your morality. Now, he thought it improved his situation. You think he did? No, because I had another question for him. I said, Gil, is that your morality, what you just said? Yeah, that's my morality. It's like he didn't see what was coming, right? God bless his heart. So I asked him, then why are you pushing your morality on me right now? Notice these are all questions. I could make them into accusations, but that would not be shrewd. Use a question. Goes into his court. And so when he heard that, it was like, okay, he's back here rubbing his chin again, And he makes a couple of false starts. He can't get going. And finally he says, that's not fair. I said, what's not fair? And he said, well, I can't find a way to say it which it sounds right. He thought I was playing a word trick on him. I said, Gil, it doesn't sound right because you're doing the very thing you're telling me not to do. Okay? I call that practical suicide. All right? And sometimes in conversations with people, they'll stop and they'll say like, now you got me all confused. And I said, no, you were confused when you started. Just now figured it out. See, this is my goal, is to help him, to get him thinking, put a stone in their shoe, whatever. Okay, so let me just close with this thing, because I want to tell you what happened, and this is how it just comes down to where our final focus is. I gave this talk at Berkeley a number of years ago, Berkeley, right? And it was the gallery was probably 3 times as large as this, and they had overflow rooms. It was packed. Okay, and I gave this talk, and it's philosophical. It's about philosophy. It's about moral relativism, the liabilities of that. But when I got to the end, I made the observation: if moral relativism is false, then some form of moral objectivism is true. There are moral rules out there. Okay, we know that. We all know that, and we also know something else. We know that we break them. And then I made reference to something that all of them feel in their hearts when they reflect on themselves, given the fact that they break these moral rules, that we all feel something, and the feeling has a name. We use a word to describe it, and I asked the audience, what is the word that we use to describe the feeling of the bad we see down inside of us? And I just paused, and then I started hearing it. Guilt, 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 guilt. I said, right, we all feel guilty. Why? Why do we all feel guilty? Maybe culture causes it. I don't know. We can talk about that. But how about this? Maybe we feel guilty because we are guilty. Is that in the running? And then I said the answer to guilt is not denial. That's relativism. The answer to guilt, I said, is forgiveness. And this is where Jesus comes in. That's what I told them. Now, I've used this line many times. I said both services before you. I get kind of choked up every time I hear myself say that because it's so powerful. It speaks directly to the existential circumstance that every person finds himself in, and it's an answer. But it's not an answer just hanging out there in the sky. It's an answer that I tied to, in my case, an argument demonstrating they already know something. They know there's objective morality. They know they've violated, and that is bad news. But there's good news. And this is where the Christian story begins to make so much more sense for people than it did before. It's a story of a God who sets a standard so that we would live and flourish. And it's a standard that we've broken. It's a story of justice and mercy. Justice is punishment for everything we've ever done wrong, and God misses nothing. And every person will stand before Jesus someday and give an account for their lives, and it's going to be a mess, I'm just telling you. Because the books will be opened, and in those books, which I call the books of death, in Revelation 20, every single thing you ever did wrong is crystal clear there. God is making a list, and he's checking it twice. He misses nothing. It will not look good for you unless your name is written in the book of life. And in the book of life, those people who were guilty trusted in the source of perfect mercy, receiving forgiveness for everything they've ever done in their life, and God misses nothing. And that person who is judging, who writes your name in the book of life, is the man, Jesus of Nazareth, who took the payment upon himself so that we could be forgiven. And that is very good news. Father, that applause is for the greatness of the message of the gospel of Jesus and the greatness of the mercy that you make available through him. Dear Father, by your mercies, apply that where it's needed in this audience and keep us ever mindful as followers of Jesus to be faithful to him and to lean on your mercy every moment of our lives. For Christ's sake.